So our old recording died, which is topical.
I know. Great topic. We forgot to turn the mics on. And by we,
I was
mean
gonna say there ain't no we, dog.
By I mean me, to be grammatically correct. No, it would be I. I forgot to turn the mics on.
You forgot to turn the mics.
Well, I was thinking about the rhyming, and I was like, oh, it'd be I. Yeah. Oh well. What's in the past is in the past. That's where we left off.
That's funny because
that's literally
what we just said.
Literally the last recording. What's in the past is in the past.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about before we realized the mics weren't on. And by we, I mean I. Was that last time we were talking about death in some places that we could have referenced James, where it says it's the separation of pneuma and body. I don't remember the Greek is for body there. But being the spirit / breath for the Jew
would be flesh, so go with that.
I can't remember if it was flesh or body. That's my point.
What verse,
Anyways,
what verse is it?
I don't remember. I think it's like 2 or 3. Useless. I know. We've known this for a long time, though. James says it. I know that. But it's a separation.
Just read the whole book of James.
Yeah. But it's separation of, let's say at the very least, body and spirit / breath. And we kind of affirmed that. We also kind of ended with what is death. But you had a more pertinent question about.
Well, and it kind of gets to the nature of it, right? Because the question, yes, I am searching the whole book of James now. The question is, the question I initially had for this series, pardon me, the question I initially had for the series was, what do we make of hell when it talks about the second death, right? Because if death is destroyed in hell, then hell being the second death, okay, what does that mean? Right? Like, what does it mean? And so that kind of gets to the nature of death. What exactly is death? And so if it's separation, okay, so what is the second death, the second separation? What would that mean?
So I can tell you a couple different theories people have had.
Shoot. What is on my shirt?
Let's go with the very more traditional view of ECT. Because ECT now is a little bit different than it was back in the early centuries. Just a little
high random tinnitus.
Oh. You good?
Yeah, maybe. You know, like in the movies when like a bomb goes off.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I have right now here.
Huh.
And it's gone.
Well, there you go, I guess.
That was so weird. All right, carry on. I'm sure that's nothing to be concerned about.
There are different. Just realized the video is a little slow, but oh well. Different perspectives.
Start moving slower.
So for like Augustine, for instance, would be one of the, depending on who you ask, because people will argue over the apostolic fathers and who was really this, who was really that. So that's one where I'm like, you're going to be probably leaning the direction that you kind of lean towards to interpret them that way. But they didn't really get deeply into that kind of stuff.
Sure.
The other early second, third century people, yes, they got into a little bit more. Like Justin gives his thoughts. I think it's Tatian gives his thoughts.
And I have not read a single thing.
I actually have his book in the mail coming on
of
Tuesday.
Course you do.
I do. And it's a very short book, it's like 40 pages.
Does Katie know how many Yep. Does Katie know how many books you order?
She orders the same amount of books for herself, but they're all fiction.
You guys are going to be so poor.
I know. And we're music teachers.
There is going to be no money there. I'm going to be bailing you out.
No, we'll be fine. Anyways, so those two give their thoughts. Tertullian definitely has his thoughts. He's probably...
Tertullian had a lot of thoughts.
Tertullian, that was probably one of the first to, for the traditional side, to make it explicitly clear his view. Or like it was explicitly clear that he is a traditional ECT viewer. In that he was like, anyone who says that the soul's not immortal is wrong. He was like using it to back up his view on what hell, his version of view on what hell is. But then you also have I think it's Arnobius, who had his different views. But you get to Augustine. So Augustine in, I think it's book 20 or 21. I can't remember. It's in my notes somewhere. His explanation of the second death is that he sees it as, because, and he's based on scripture and a large number of philosophy. People who says he doesn't do a lot of philosophies haven't reread Augustine recently. But he's arguing for the immortality of the soul, and he's very strong arguments for why hell should be what it is. But one of the things he says regarding the second death is that the first death is the separation of body and soul, and it is against the soul's desire to be separated. The second death for him is the permanent keeping together of the body and soul, of which the soul does not want, because now it's in the physical state. Because his view on hell is that it is literal fire. The earlier views were definitely some metaphorical view on fire, some very clear, like, no, this is a literal fire. So like Augustine viewed that the body was changed to withstand the fire, but withstanding in the fact that it doesn't burn away.
Interesting. Kind of burning bush-esque.
Kind of, but it still feels the pain of the fire, kind of thing. And then if it does burn away, that it then regrows back, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of an interesting idea, right? Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are also in the fire, yet not burning away. Now, obviously, they don't feel the pain of the fire, right? That's kind of the whole idea, but there is like some sort of an idea to that. I can see where he might be deriving that from.
And so his view is that the second death, as I said, is the permanent keeping together of the two, and it's against the soul's desire and will to be together.
I'm not seeing that passage in James, by the way.
It is in James. I know that.
I skimmed through, and now I used YouVersion's terrible search function.
Yeah, don't use our search function.
It's awful.
I'll put it in the description later. I know. It's in my notes.
Send it
elsewhere.
to me too, because
so I read it 2 days ago. But there's another view that the second death is that, with the first death being that yes, your body and soul are separated, but your spirit still goes somewhere, and so the second death is that it is no more. So there's that view. Second death, there's some, it's not very popular to my memory, that have argued for the eternal conscious torment view, in that perhaps the body might go away, but the soul keeps on. Or some will say it is just simply the final separation from God, period, which means you're still alive in some sense, but you're separated.
Yeah, and
so there's a couple of the different perspectives. There's definitely more, and by no means am I like naming everyone or doing all of them justice. So if you're mad at me, sorry. But those are like some of the big ones that I can remember of that came up in my research.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the last one there, the latter one, I guess would be a better way to put it, is the one that I was kind of taught growing up, right? Is like it's the final separation from God. And for a lot of years, that's what I put forward in it. To a degree, is obviously I haven't looked into it as much as you have, but to a degree, it's kind of still what I think.
I mean, there's all of them.
It's full separation from God.
Well, I think in a sense they all say that to a degree. It's just that, what does that separation look like?
Yeah.
And it's like, in that, if you have, for instance, I mean, there's different perspectives on like how active is God involved in the fire, how if it's just there's a place for that. Like there's different perspectives on that. I would say majority, to my understanding, especially today, would say that it is separation from God, and therefore it's a state that's set up for others, but it's still separation from Him, which means that He's chosen not to be there in His ability to be omnipresent or not be present there.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what does that really mean that you're fully separated? Again, like some will say, well, because He's the source of life, to be cut off from God would mean that you cease to be, because there's no more life. If He's not there giving you life, then how are you still living? And some will say that no, He's keeping you in a sense alive, and because like Augustine, let's use Augustine again. He used the argument that many people still use today, that the punishment does not always match that of the actual action. In that, like, if I were to steal from you, that takes me like, let's say 5 minutes. You go into jail, that's not for 5 minutes. You face a punishment much longer than that. And so,
like the act of murder does not take very long.
No. And so, but because it's based on the level of it and who you've done it against, and because we've done it against an infinite God, that warrants an infinite punishment. And that would be like one of Augustine's view, and that's why you're kept alive, because you have to infinitely be punished, or in some form, whatever your view on, whether it's literal fire, metaphorical fire, etc. Versus the other ones, they'd be like, no, we agree with that. Like take, for instance, the annihilationists, say we agree with that, that there's different degrees based on that, but that it eventually ends with the death of not just the body, but the spirit itself, because God is not sustaining you eternally. And that therefore the way it's talking about eternal punishment is saying that the punishment is eternal. The effect of it is an eternal punishment. But they're saying you're not eternally, he's not punishing you eternally. Like, he's not an active, constant thing, versus the other view would be like, you're an active, constant thing. And then your universalist would be like, it's a punishment, or I'm going to rephrase it. Reforming fire, because I think universalist has more of the modern day undertone to it. The fire is punishing you, and that there will be no more death. And the second death is in that death itself is what's destroyed, and that evil is destroyed, not so much that the human is gone forever.
Yeah.
If that gives
Yeah.
you a good place to kind of go from there.
Yeah. So again, obviously, as you know, I'm very big on the prove it to me from the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think one can go too far in that direction.
Sure. Yeah.
Of like, I need a verse to tell me how to breathe. It's like, okay, well, yeah. And I realize that's an exaggeration for the purposes of the argument, but like, Bible does tell you to use your brain at the same time, right? It's just take the word and to meditate on it.
Yeah.
But I would have to look more into the actual cases and the cases they're making from Scripture and say, okay, yeah, I could see that from the Bible, or I really think you're stretching that. Right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's so tough because you go in with a lot of preconceived notions, whether you want to or not.
No, yeah, of course. Especially regarding this, like,
sorry, screen time usage for today.
I mean, let's just kind of consider this, for instance, like, some ECT people today would say this is not necessarily an important piece. And some would say, no, it still is. But let's just take, for instance, the really old, like one of the key pieces for the early church fathers was, for instance, was immortality of the soul, as you and I've told you about several times. You have like Arnobius, Martyr, Tatian, and a couple other, I think Irenaeus. I think it's Irenaeus. Maybe it might be Ignatius. One of the two, I'm pretty sure. They
Something
say
with an I.
They make it very clear that it is the immortality of not just the body, but of the soul is completely contingent on God.
Yeah.
And therefore, the benefits of life, immortality, and all these things are given to those who are faithful, and then the others are not given that. And then they have different passages they look at that. For instance, they look at Paul's letters where it talks about like immortality something that's given to people. You have like, I think it's Paul again in Timothy where it says that God is the only one who has immortality and incorruptibility. But then you also have the others say, well, no, the reforming fire and the traditional view would say, no, the soul is immortal in a sense, whether it be it had immortality prior to the fall, and then is either given back again, or it remained all the way through, or that is given to them, but they didn't start it, but they were given it later. And then someone say they had neither immortal or mortal, which is one that I'm like, I'm not sure how you can say that, but okay.
That really is kind of a binary choice.
I'm not sure how you get around that, but okay. But they'll say, no, they do have that. But again, the question of the soul, on one hand, you can argue from scripture, but it's also a very philosophical thing. And depending on what your philosophical belief is on that, that's going to definitely contribute to how you read into that. So like Tatian and Justin Martyr, from what I can see, they don't believe the soul's immortal. So they're seeing like, no, you're not, that soul's not given immortality, therefore you're done.
Right.
But Augustine and Gregory of Nyssa, so those are two very different views. One's reforming fire and one's ECT. It's like, no, it is from God, is God breathed into it, therefore it is of God. You can't kill that off.
Yeah.
Therefore, and it's much more complex than that. And so for anyone who's more equipped than Augustine, I'm just trying to give a brief overview. Because it is immortal, you can't actually kill it. Therefore, it is going to live on forever.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, they read into it that way. And so the question is, does the Bible teach that? And is the philosophy correct on that?
Yeah.
As you said, that's a preconceived notion that if you reject that view, you're probably not going to see that in the scriptures unless someone provides you a very clear-cut passage saying, no, the soul's immortal, and vice versa the same.
Yeah. Well, and it's tough because there isn't, just that nice one line of the Bible that says, the soul is immortal, right? Because like if it did, okay, well, I can say, all right, but the Bible's job, I don't want to phrase it that way. The Bible's goal, that's a better way to put it. The Bible's goal is not to convince you of all doctrines and clear everything up for you, because if it were, then it would remove a lot of faith, right? And we talked about faith does require evidence. It also does require you to actually have trust in something, right? The Latin confide, is where we get confidence.
Yeah.
Confide with faith.
Yeah.
So there is some sense in which you do need some belief with faith.
Mm-hmm.
And if it were to spell out every little thing for you, firstly, you'd lack faith. But more importantly, secondly, that's assuming that human beings wouldn't still misinterpret that, right? I mean, even some things that the Bible is very, very clear on, people still misinterpret.
Yep, we find some ways to do it.
Usually to go with their priors.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, even if it were to lay out the exact doctrine of hell perfectly, people would still find a way to insert what they want into it.
Exactly.
Right. So why then would the Bible tell us these things that we can't really understand? Right? Why do it try to articulate that to us if all we're going to do is the exact same thing we've done with what we have?
Yeah. And there's a layer of which it gives us things that it knows that God knows we will understand, and things that he's like, here's what you're going to know, and know that you're not going to be able to understand the rest of it. Like, for instance, I'm one of those that's kind of like, I have my leanings. I'm not convinced in any particular view. I have a leaning here and there, but even then, I'm not like, but even then, it's one of those where I'm like, I am just thankful that God is just, and that whatever he does, I'm not going to act like I have this all figured out, because I don't think he necessarily made us right. I mean, you can still derive ideas.
Sure.
But I'm not of the positions like it is 100% spelled out. And it's like, I think there's some things that he left a little ambiguous. Hence why there's different, even under the big three, there's different little camps within each one.
Yeah. Well, and that tends to happen with so many different human perspectives and ideas and, backgrounds, histories, etc. You're going to get a lot of different ideas in the text. And that's part of that is not in the text, but interpretations on the text.
Yeah.
Right? And part of that is the beauty of humanity, right? That we are all different, that we are all able to bring these unique ideas to our interpretations of the text, but understanding that the text itself does not contradict, right? So if we have an issue where we are contradicting the text is not what changes.
Mm-hmm.
We do.
Yeah.
Right. And
the other tricky thing with the text is we have to understand it in its context, because there's times where we take a passage like, look, it's clearly this. It says it right here. And it's like, right, but look at everything else around it.
Yeah.
Everything else around it says this other thing. And it's like, is that an image of something? Like, what are we doing?
4 is a great example of that. Right. People just always quote Philippians 4:13, and Philippians 4:6 and 7, right? Philippians 4:13 being, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And then Philippians 4:6 and 7, right? Ask all things with prayer and supplication, submitting yourselves to God. Like, people like to quote those, and it's like, right, but do you know the context, right? Are you reading the verses in between that? Because the entire point of Philippians is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, in order to share the gospel, right? And I did I think it was a stream.
I think it was a stream. We talked about that. We talked about misused verses, a couple of them.
Yeah. So there are a few passages like that, right, where it's talking about context or it's talking about something specific in the context, and people just take a verse out. We're generally, right, Jeremiah 29:11 is like the poster child for that.
Yeah. Or even if it's not the immediate context around it, it's pulling on imagery from previous books that it just expects that and if you don't,
John and Revelation.
Oh my gosh, Revelation pulls up from so much Old Testament stuff that, so for instance, like, here's a passage. It's in Revelation 20. I'll use Revelation 14.
What we're talking about,
Revelation
actually.
20. So Revelation 14 talks about how there is the eternal punishment, that there is no rest day or night, and that there's smoke going up forever and ever. So EC2 was like clearly right here, and then but the church, the conditionals is like, notice first that the smoke is going on forever and ever. It says the same about Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah is clearly not there anymore.
Right.
And they'll say also the way that we see the terms morning and night, I mean, there's ways it talks about, it's not saying that. They're different. I can't remember the exact argument they have for it, but there's a legitimate argument behind that too. And then there's the fact that says in the presence of the God and the angels, which would not be hell. And so it's like, okay, so is that really a great verse for it? And then they argue that. But then there's Revelation 20, where it talks about how
where all this was born out of.
Where the devil is thrown into the lake of fire, where he will be tormented forever and ever. People are like, okay, right there. But then other people point out is like, well, also notice that death and Hades thrown there, where they're not actual figures, they're personified for something.
Yeah.
And they're not denying Satan is not, because if people are throwing it too, but it's like there's all this other imagery that's going on. It's like, is that really talking about this? So Gavin Orlow come back, he's like, I don't see how you can use that as an imagery. And I was say, but here's how you can. And they provide it. It's like, okay, so is John pulling from something in these spots here? Obviously, death and Hades are images. Obviously, the beast and the
False prophet.
false prophet. Scholars have argued that these are symbols too of like not just individual people, but of like systems, like governmental systems.
And they could very well be both.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, okay, so then what do we do with this? And then some will say we're like a partial conditionalist, be like, well, the devil was punished eternally, but the humans, because there was a level of which they are guilty, but they're also deceived, that they are snuffed out. And then the full condition will be like, no, they're all just gone. Because why would God? Because there are questions like, why is God keeping an evil figure alive in some sense? And there's different ways you can respond to that. But like those are passages that are like, they seem super clear, but the question is it in its context and in its calling back to places, is it as clear as we think it is? And I'm not saying it's to cause doubt, but that's part of the debate are like those two verses.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
No, you're good. Right. And so I do want to get to what we said we were going to do at the beginning.
Yeah.
Which is, if death is destroyed, how is there a second death? Right. Because obviously if I were to say all apples in the world have been destroyed and there is a second apple, you'd be like, but I thought all apples were destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So unless apple has taken on a new meaning, then that seems like a contradictory statement, right?
Well, I think too, like if we think about Genesis 3, Genesis 4, Paul's letter, I think to the Corinthians, maybe it was the Romans, and then all throughout the prophets and the wisdom literature, they personify death frequently.
Right.
Paul calls it the final enemy. In fact, he even treats it as an actual figure all throughout. I think it's Romans or 1 Corinthians. I can't remember which one it is.
It might be 1 Corinthians 15.
I think you might be right. And he does it earlier
he's
too,
discussing more eschatological matters.
and then John does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if death is being personified as a figure, that's almost like not just that's a thing that we go through, but as a thing that's like us and captured us.
Yeah.
And it's like almost like the master. Then the second death could be in that sense that the place of the dead, which entraps us, is no more, and therefore the second death is that there is no more possibility of death because death is removed and anyone else who's associated with death is removed. And
that's kind of what I had thought initially, right? That's what my immediate thought was like, okay, well then perhaps it's just using that language of death to say that death has no more place. That there is no, especially considering Hades being the realm of the dead.
Yeah.
Right, Sheol, if you want to use the Hebrew.
And I think death is like the fourth horseman, I think it is, or third.
Yes.
And so it's a personified character in John Revelation.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother topic that you could go down, right? You could really do a long time on Revelation. You could spend the rest of your life on it.
And then Paul calls it the final enemy. And that is a thing that must be done away with.
Right.
So the question is John referring to the second death as in treating death as a figure?
Yeah.
Isn't no more. But then also what's interesting too is the serpent is quoted in Hebrews as having the power of death, which Genesis 3 kind of lends its discussion to as well.
Pardon me. Sorry.
So it's like, oh wait, we're talking about death itself, and we're also talking about those are both figures tied deeply to the devil himself.
Right.
In that one, his name, his title, and two, something he has the power of.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's so my second thought then after pretty much that was, okay, but maybe death takes on a sort of a new meaning, right? Of like, for now, death in our minds, right? This is kind of granting soul sleep a little bit. Death is like a destruction of sorts.
Okay.
Right? And like, or like a hiatus, if you will.
Okay.
Of absence from the body, right? And that's kind of taking Paul's to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And kind of taking the language of what a lot of soul sleep people will do and saying that, well, he fell asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's referring to his soul, which maybe it's a non-zero chance. I don't particularly lean in that direction.
At least the body's asleep.
The body is asleep, right? And the question is,
in some sense,
is the body what resurrected, or is it a whole new could go down a bunch of different pathways there.
No, yeah, because there's some who say that each are given new bodies. Some will say that Christians are given new bodies, but the others will get their old bodies. And then it says that we'll get the same bodies, but they're glorified, and he'll get the same old.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So you could go down a whole bunch of different pathways there. This is excruciating for my back. Oh. Nope. Just not gonna go left leg over there. There we go. All right.
Soul sleep, as you were saying, you don't grant that.
Right. Yeah. So
Right. So you're granted for the argument, but you're not persuaded of that.
I'm not particularly persuaded. I could be, but as at this moment, I'm not particularly persuaded. So if it is a hiatus, then is the hiatus then destroyed, and then you get kind of the idea of either ECT. Honestly, any view works for there. Does death then take on that new meaning of ultimate true separation / destruction / whatever your view is?
I mean, because we notice that it seems to be that the lake of fire is the vessel in which carries out
Right.
that second death. Of which, on one hand, if you take the pure imagery of that, fire burns and consumes things,
Right.
and swallows it up. So therefore, if death is thrown in there, it is being eradicated in a sense, or turned to ashes.
Right.
But then also, if you take either of the two immortal views, then it's the fire that is punishing in some sense, and therefore the death is that would be probably lean towards that separation, but also that if you're an ECT, if you go with Augustine's version of ECT, at least is that permanent trapping into that, and you're removed from God's presence. The other one being that more of the idea that evil itself is one is eradicated in death and fire. I don't know. I it's weird because when you have the word die, it typically refers to death.
Right.
There's a couple cases where like it's used metaphorically. For instance, like you have is where I find funny, and thankfully there are some people who recognize the error in making this, but some will say, I have heard people say like, oh, well, Ephesians says that you are dead, and therefore you cannot say that you're sick. It's like, Jesus literally said that, but okay. But we can see there that within consistency that Paul's using that language of death to describe the state of the fact that you're not with the Lord.
Right.
You're not in his presence. You're not in the garden.
There's no communion between you and God.
Right. And in that sense, you are, you're not even like sojourning, like kind of like if we take like the idea of like the second Exodus, where like you could say that we as Christians are in the sojourning period in the wilderness. We are God's people, but we're getting ready to go into the official promised land, which is the new creation. But they're not even there. They're like in Egypt still in that one sense. They're still under that slave of death itself. Of which you can then say, okay, is he talking about like you were once dead in your trespasses, mean that you were a slave of death? Or is he saying
that is reflected elsewhere in other language?
Right. Or we're talking about some people say like, is your spiritual state?
Galatians, Galatians pops that in mind there.
And some will say it's spiritual death. Some will say it's referring to like, it's the condition itself, but it's not necessarily spiritual exactly. It's just describing you, just like Jesus calling you sick. Like you're not dead and sick. Now your sickness may lead you to death. But you also have John's language when he quotes Jesus saying that those who do not believe are condemned already. They were already in that state. Yeah. And so could Paul be saying that you were already in the pathway to death. And now some of these you could stretch. There's some of our obvious stretch, but these are just some of the different perspectives.
Yeah, and to kind of tie a few ideas together, and I'm going to popcorn scripture a little bit.
Sure.
But don't yell at me.
This is our podcast. If they want to yell at us, they either make a video of us or comment.
Exactly. Which you should. You shouldn't yell at us. You should leave comments. That helps with engagement.
And like and subscribing.
There you go. Hitting that notification bell. We're doing the outro too early. Dag nabbit, it's only been what, half hour?
Roughly.
All right then. So you're popcorning scripture.
Yeah, you want to tie some ideas together.
Because something you just said there was really interesting, right? The sickness can lead to death. Yeah. Oh, what a novel concept.
Whoa.
No.
I'm a philosopher.
Yeah, sure, pal. Um, no, but more along the lines of that sickness leading to death is there a possibility in which like you are dead in your trespasses, meaning obviously you cannot earn your way back to God, right? That's kind of the whole point that builds to one of the most famous verses that Paul ever wrote. I guess 2 verses.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
Ephesians 2:8 and 9 for anybody not following along.
just sorry to interrupt, but a couple years
Please do.
ago, I did a presentation on that verse, and I was asking a question about that. I said, if we go back to Isaiah talks about that as separation.
Right.
That very way you were kind of pointing. So I one time was arguing that that's what death is that you were separated from God.
So perhaps then, if we're doing sickness leading to death, perhaps there is a stage in which you are sick, in which you are dead.
Mm.
So sickness would be you are not quite saved, but you are seeking after God, right? Because I'm thinking when Christ calls them sick, he's calling the people who are still sitting and dining with him and being convicted by him.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's
some people
to the Pharisees.
say Jesus never told anybody about their sin. It's like, well, hang on. He literally called them sick. He calls them sick in the
To
passage.
the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And grants them calling them sinners, but it's like, why do you think you're higher above them?
Right.
You should be celebrating that they're coming here. As we've been
Exactly.
talking about in our parable series.
You should go watch that. So perhaps there's that stage in which you are seeking after God and seeking after Christ, though I repeat myself, and seeking after the Holy Spirit, though I repeat myself twice.
You can distinguish
In which-
Father, Son, and Spirit.
Exactly, yeah. In which you are sick, but perhaps dead is you're not able to make it on your own. So right there you do get the idea where you're both sick and dead. Because those who are sick recognize that they are ill. Right? If you're sick, you got runny nose, cough, you're probably not going around like, I'm A-okay. Like, oh, I'm sick. You recognize that. And what do? You seek to get better. Hopefully. If not, there's something wrong with you and we need to get that addressed. But if you're sick,
Jesus.
You need Jesus. And if you're sick, you are seeking to get better. Not that you can make it on your own, because you can't. So in that sense, you are dead, but there is a sickness leading to that death, that sickness being sin. And you are searching in that sickness to find the cure, who is Christ.
Make sure I'm not misunderstanding you. Are you proposing potentially that if let's say take us, let's say we were not Christians,
Gay.
are we dead then becoming sick? Like is it like a reverse? Or is it like we're all sick, but then those who end up in Christ become healed and those who do not end up dying?
I'm saying that I'm trying to rectify the idea that you are sick and dead.
Okay.
Right? Because Christ calls the sinners sick.
Yep.
Paul calls them dead.
Yeah.
Both are writing well, Jesus isn't writing, but Jesus is providing inspired teaching. Both are providing inspired teaching. So I'm attempting to rectify that, right? I'm attempting to bridge that sort of gap in order to help us to understand what exactly are the natures of death. And, well, I mean sickness, but more so looking at the nature of death. What exactly is it? What does it mean then for there to be a second death? Right? Like how is death as personified or as force or whatever it may be in this instance being thrown into hell? What does it mean for that? So if we can understand the nature of what death is, then we can understand Revelation 20 a little better.
Gotcha.
So I'm trying to bridge that gap right now.
I mean, there's also a sense where you can say they're using different imagery.
Sure.
And so, like, you can bridge it, but also it's not. You can also say it's not necessarily
No, I know.
necessary to bridge them.
Like I said, I
Yeah.
was kind of jumping around scripture a little bit there, but
no, I think the interesting thing is that we're describing the state, but then there's also the very fact that well, here let's talk about the Genesis for a second, because you know that's my favorite place to go.
always it's always Genesis with Josh.
But here's like a point that in there we have God warning Adam and commanding that he will be doomed to die. As you know, that's my preferred based on a few other people. And I think that based on the video I did on the serpent thing, I'm more convinced on that being the right way to interpret it. Of which death is also like yes, we could talk about the separation, but it also very much is the dying of the body. That the statement that God has about Adam is that he would live continually, eternally, however you want to translate that, if he took off the fruit after he took off the other fruit. And so there is that separation of sacred space and the idol or the God's home. I don't really want to call it home, but
I know what you mean.
based on like Exodus, where we call the dwelling place tabernacle, the dwelling place of God and the dwelling place of man.
I think that's a better way to put it. Yeah.
I mean, he can choose to make that his home in a sense. And we frequently call church God's house. So in a sense, that is not foreign to Christian thinking, but there's a sense where you're talking about like, okay, we're talking about the state of being, but also the warning is given to Adam is like, you're going to die. You are going to die.
Yeah.
And then it seems to be that the serpent has a role in that very idea of you're going to die because he's eating the very thing that you are.
Yeah.
And that what happens is that he is removed from the garden so that way he does not live continually, so he will die. And so is when Paul is clearly talking about like, yes, you're gonna die, like that spiritual state, but also, or that state of being you're in. And then Paul's also kind of like, yeah, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You're on that path. You know why? Because you are dust and you are going to die.
Yeah.
And so that second death, like, is that second death referring? I mean, it could be both too. I'm willing to grant that. Is it referring to the actual physical death itself? Is it referring to the state of being? Is it referring to both? I mean, I think you can obviously make a way for it to say both, but then how is John viewing that? Because obviously, yes, the Bible is not contradictory, but also it's not necessarily always univocal in everything that it says. Like Matthew uses a Greek word differently than Luke does, but in its context is like, no, I get what you're doing. You're making a very specific point with this word.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we have to look at the entirety of Revelation, but like, how is John using death in that idea? Because again, you have death personified as an actual like horseman. You have it as it and Hades are both persons in a sense that are being thrown to the lake of fire with the false prophet, with I blanked on it again, the beast, with the devil.
This time the other one though.
I know. But like, it's this place, and I don't want to not call it a thing, because
you're on the right track though, right? Because death isn't given like actual human quality.
No, what I mean by thing though is that Hades is described as a place.
Sure.
Death is almost like a deprivation of life. It's kind of like when we say evil is not a thing, is a deprivation of that which is good.
Which even then, but yeah,
like which we're not talking. Like you wouldn't say like evil is a thing that exists in the sense that it is its own thing. Like it's not in the sense of dualism. Like there's a thing of good and there's a thing of evil. It's like, no, God is good, and it could take C.S. Lewis's view that evil is
the
bending
of the good.
It is the bending of that which is like, you don't know what is broken unless you know that which is, or that which is bent compared to unless you know what that which is straight. And so like if you take that perspective, then evil is not a thing, but it's a deprivation or a lacking of that good thing. Or someone will say like you're taking a good thing, you're corrupting it. But it's still a good thing that is not used goodly, to use old English.
Interesting.
And so like death is that the body is deprived of life. It's deprived of that pneuma.
Yeah.
The spirit is deprived of the body. So there's also a separation, but it's also a deprivation of those two things. So as I was saying, I don't know if I want to call it a thing, because death is also viewed as like a thing that something that happens to people, a deprivation, but is also personified as if it was a thing. Just like sin in Genesis 4 is personified like it's a creature. And it's like, well, sin's not a thing. It's like action, state of being, like all these different ways you can describe it. but also it describes as a creature, and his natural desire is for you, Cain, but you must rule over it. Like you must conquer it, be king over it.
Be Cain over
Be Cain over it. And so that's why I'm saying, like, I don't know if I want to call death up. I know in there it's treated like a thing, but also like in reality, not in metaphorical language, in imagery.
Right.
What is death?
That's kind of the question.
I don't know. Do you have any, I guess this is your question regarding second death. Do you have like any kind of like, here's where we started, here's where I'm still thinking, or like, here's what I'm kind of playing with right now?
It's pretty much that same initial thought I had, right? Which is regarding kind of separation.
Which I think all of them do, but what is that separation?
Yeah. Which I didn't expect to come in getting like a more concrete answer.
Yeah.
But it's still just interesting to think about.
So I guess just while we're on the topic of it, where does your mind kind of go with the idea of separation? Because I think all the views agree on some level of separation.
9:20 now. No, I don't know, right? Because this is really like the first time, like these past few weeks or what, actually longer than that, past couple months now, where we've really been talking about hell and the different views. It's like the first time I've actually thought about the nature of death, right? And so these are still very raw ideas that I don't have finite.
That's the point of this podcast. That's what
I know. That's
me.
what I'm saying, right? Yeah, that's exactly the point of this podcast, right? Is to meditate on these things a little further. But with that, right, comes the same kind of question's not the right word. Haze almost of like there's all of these ideas kind of floating around and not really sure where they all necessarily fit in. Like with so to kind of talk about how I've always talked about it, it's just having no communion with God. That's what separation is. But if we're going to use that language for Paul, to say you are dead in your trespasses, well, okay, then I'm like almost pigeonholed into the
no communion
understanding of no communion, and that being like him saying it's a path towards death, right? Kind of reflective a little bit of Christ's language in John 3, but not quite the same. But if I'm not taking that view, then obviously I'm not pigeonholed, right? So it's kind of like how in what order almost do I approach the text of like, do I approach it Revelation 20 first? Okay, if I'm then taking that as a separation view and then go to Ephesians 2, all right, well, there's only really one interpretation that this can have. Or do I go Ephesians 20, good grief, Ephesians 2 first, and then kind of look, okay, well, this could mean a couple of different things here, and then from there go to Revelation 20 and see if I can piece together what the actual ideas presented are.
Assuming that they're univocal on that idea.
Right.
And
well, assuming obviously there's some way you can get the true ideas from them.
Yeah.
Question is, what are them?
Well, then there's Paul's language that wages of sin is death.
Right.
Of which, at the very least, from a Genesis perspective, that is you're gonna die, which everyone does because, well, we've all sinned. But then Christ dies for us, but then he also rises. What he does is he provides a way that is providing for the resurrection to bring that out.
Mm-hmm.
But then all are resurrected in some sense. So that's why there is a second death. So then, like, okay, is that resurrection then saying that is the second death that...
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because if you bring up the resurrection, is it the second death that... Is it really describing that they are literally dying for a second time?
Yeah.
But this time it is final? Or are they just separated? And I don't want to say just separated.
Well, no,
to mean that.
Right, yeah.
But to be like...
Because there's separation and destruction, or there's just separation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I got
and I was trying to say just separation, meaning that they're not going to... it's not the idea of they're dead, in the idea of like when we talk about you are ceasing to be, in a sense, whether it's just simply the deprived of life of the body.
The body effectively ceases to be.
Have life, but then also, if you take the second death as both, then both body and spirit cease to be, or cease to have life. Or is it it's a removal from the access to life, which is God, which then is like, okay, so is it just the separation idea? Again, not to mean that in a demeaning way to anyone who holds that view, but in the way just to kind of like put some boundaries in place.
Yeah.
You're welcome for that.
Well, yeah, no, the resurrection, I actually hadn't even factored that in, really, right? Which seems strange to say, because that's the whole precursor of the passage in Revelation 20 that we're discussing.
Yeah.
Right? Is the resurrection of the dead for judgment. And
I know.
Holy crap. And I really hadn't thought about that particularly.
The problem with theology is that they all tie back together. So eventually like, yeah, but about this, and eventually you're back at my favorite book. You're back at Genesis. Because you have to it all starts here. So I need to rework forward again.
Start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. My kid's really into Sound of Music right now, so
it's a good movie. They like the music.
All right. Well, she doesn't watch the movie. She just knows the
soundtrack. Yeah.
She don't watch TV or nothing.
That's right.
Still a great decision. I stand by it.
Anyways.
Yeah. From death to kid, back to death. What a conversation.
Resurrection.
Yeah. No, I really hadn't thought about the resurrection in light of this. So now I'm going to have to sit and think about that.
I think there's the resurrection, and because of the resurrection, there's the question of Christ, because Christ rises. So therefore, if I could try to argue this a couple different ways, and I'm going to try to do my best not to strawman anyone. So if you hear anything, please help me to clarify. I was saying at least the two primary known views, with the conditional and the eternal.
I love your little caveats.
Let's say for the conditional, they could say that Christ on the cross, like the language primarily talked about is death. Not that he doesn't experience any other kind of anguish or punishment, but he dies and he rises. It talks about him going to the underworld. So is the resurrection in that sense, or is the second death related to resurrection in that sense, discussing that through Christ there is the eternal life, meaning that the outcome is that what is eternal is that you have life. And then the others that is what is eternal is that second death or that punishment. Whether that be, you could take in this case, we're arguing conditional is the finality. That punishment is final and eternal in that sense. And so in that sense, the Christ going on the cross and him dying and rising is the passageway for life. And therefore what he experiences is death, and he overcomes that. Let's go with a traditional view. And this kind of comes down to your view on the atonement too. So I'm going to try to bridge them as best I can. Christ experiences in some sense the wrath of God that the others who do not go to hell would have experienced, or the burden of it without being condemned. And so then in that sense, when he dies, not only does he die, but he also takes on that burden. Yes. I mean, I think the conditional would say that too, but if I'm going to try to really kind of get into this, there's this burden that he takes on that they don't experience, but then it ceases when he's in Hades, perhaps when he's going to proclaim, and then he comes back out, resurrected. So the question kind of plays into what happened to Christ when he died. We know at the very least he went to Hades.
Yeah.
And it talks about him proclaiming victory and the gospel and all these kinds of things. One says it doesn't talk about a punishment to him that's happening there. It says that he dies, which is what I think the Old Testament says that everyone goes there.
Yes.
So if are we going to say that there was some kind of punishment there? Like, did he, or was it that, because it mentions that he went to Tartarus, I think, so did he experience punishment there, or is he going down there proclaiming victory?
I don't see necessarily how he would experience punishment at that moment.
Sure. I'm just trying to pull different ideas. Or are we saying it was on the cross?
Yeah, I mean, I have not
there was
even considered this before. So
and on the cross, there's a layer of, cause we talked about this too. There's obviously anguish that he experiences. The anguish, in one sense, is from the very fact that he is literally dying and suffering on the cross.
yes,
That is anguish enough.
Yes.
Is there more anguish that is put on him there? Or is that the anguish he's experiencing? And I want to say that atonement really plays into which view you end up on, because I think just people who kind of take different views of atonement and they end up on different positions regarding those. So it's not like PSA automatically means that and different brands of PSA, but like PSA automatically means that you're ECT or condition.
Right.
I think I've heard people who kind of argue from the same position, but they end at different places.
Mm-hmm.
But what did Christ die for? Yes, he died for our sins, but like in the sense of what was the punishment?
Right.
I'm putting that in quotes because it could be just so many ways. What is the punishment that he experiences on the cross that he takes on in the burden of?
Yeah.
Because on one side you have Paul, who obviously talks about it very positively. He's like, he is the Passover lamb, which is why he talks about the Lord's Supper being so sacred. It's like, no, that is the Passover lamb. You are feasting the Passover lamb.
Yes.
What are you doing? Trying to turn it all around. It's like you're missing that. He's like, you're dying because you're taking something sacred and you're making a comment for all these other things. But then you also have like those are like they talk about like the very weight. Like I think it's Peter who says he died for your sins.
Yeah.
Therefore, he's also kind of pointing on the going up offering in a sense.
Oh, I think certainly, right? Especially with the language of Noah.
Yeah. He's like that the going up offering. Like he's provided a way for you to go up. And so then you say, if you tie back to Noah, like you were just saying there, is that like they went through that and there was a time of which they're drowning in that water. So the question is that drowning then on the greater scale continual, or is that drowning the final drowning and there is no more? I don't know if I really kind of presented both views properly in that case, but I hope it kind of gets the question running.
Sure.
I've been reading this stuff a lot. I'm still processing all the information still, because it's a lot to process. You're trying to read all three views at once and you're trying not to mix them together by accident in the wrong ways.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed the last episode on death. There is obviously a lot more that can be said. And again, we didn't really arrive at any concrete points, but we hopefully presented a few different views that might be of interest to you, right? Might be interesting for you to look into.
I think it provided, at least for us, a passageway, because as you said, resurrection was not something that was factored in.
Yeah, no, I'm going to have to be thinking about that now, and I will, God willing.
So it might be that the place we pick up is resurrection, how that kind of, we're done with death as the primary focus, but we're not done with it in the sense that resurrection obviously implies that you're dead. You're dead. But we're talking about like
sadly, one cannot happen without the other.
Yeah. But that might be a place to pick up on. I don't know if there's another place you want to pick up on instead. But the resurrection, I guess it is.
All right, then. God willing.
God willing.